You're listening to the Complete Human podcast, hosted by co-founders Janna Breslin and Evan DeMarco. We share authentic conversations about wellness, longevity, personal growth, and biooptimization, along with inspiring stories that encourage community and social responsibility. We hope you enjoy this episode. Hey guys, Janna Breslin here again. Most of you have heard me speak on the benefits of beets. Beets are well known as a powerful superfood and help the body create nitric oxide, the miracle molecule that supports a healthy cardiovascular system and sexual function. As an athlete, the nitric oxide boosting benefits help me power through workouts better than any artificial pre-workout I've ever taken. Now, this is why we created Complete Human Resbeet. You get all of the benefits of organic beets with additional anti-aging support from fermented resveratrol. Resveratrol is a longevity gene activator and is something I have turned to for years to help support anti-aging and optimal health. If you're not a fan of the taste of beets, we've got you covered with our all-natural and delicious dark cherry flavor. I take Resbeet twice a day, and I have to say, I feel incredible. Head on over to store.completehuman.com and enter the code podcast at checkout to get 20% off. Hey guys, you may not know it, but my morning coffee connects me to millions of women coffee farmers across the world. Women coffee farmers often face tremendous hardships, including horrible working conditions, little pay, and abuse. Complete Human has decided to do something about this problem by launching a line of coffee where the proceeds from those sales go to support women coffee farmers around the world. Not only is every bag of Cafe Caramia single batch organic coffee delicious, but the proceeds go directly to these women looking to break the long cycle of oppression. These funds help them enact real change in their communities and gives them a fair price for every pound of coffee their small micro farms produce. Most of us drink coffee every morning. Now that morning cup can be a source of real change in the world. Head on over to store.completehuman.com to purchase your bag of Cafe Caramia. Well, Dr. Greg Wells, thank you for being here. I know when I first found out about you, I was just so impressed with the focus on biooptimization in the sense of we focus on the whole human as a whole. You know, what is the complete human? And, you know, obviously that's our podcast name. So it definitely resonated with me and with us, what you do with your work. And we're just so excited to talk to you today. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I looked up some of the stuff that you guys have been up to and the people you've had on your show and the overall philosophy that you guys bring to the table, which is, you know, this holistic approach to health and well-being, which I think is really cool. So yeah, couldn't be more excited to be here and to chat and throw some ideas around and see where we land.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to start this off then is really looking at 2020 as kind of maybe this ultimate reset button. There's so many things going on in health and wellness. There's so many things going on in kind of how we understand how our brains work, how we're processing trauma. So I want to throw this out as kind of the big question is, what are the biggest challenges that we face as a species right now?
Wow. Okay. So we'll just like solve the problems of our entire planet and all of human history in the next hour. That's going to be awesome. We can totally do that. Yeah, got it. So I think some of the biggest challenges that we're faced with that we've been forced to, what I think that this whole COVID-19 era has forced us to do is to sort of basically make us confront whatever we've been needing to confront for a long time. Because when you're set home and you have all this extra time on your hands because you're not traveling or you're not commuting and you're working from home and your family's there and your kids are there, you know, like things that you can ignore, suddenly you can't ignore anymore. So I think to some extent, a lot of us have been forced to reckon with a lot of the chatter that's been going on in our minds. And I think for some people, that's been an incredibly positive thing. And I think for a lot of people, it's very, very difficult. And I'm also fully cognizant of the fact that I got to go home to a loving family and, you know, a house with a park in the backyard, and I had lots of space. My kids could be outside, and some people got confined to a 400 square foot apartment and possibly with an abusive partner, and actually, you know, legitimately lost their jobs. And, you know, so I understand that my situation was a not bad one in the grand scheme of things, despite, you know, challenges of losing a lot of speaking engagements and other stuff. So I think that to some extent, we have been forced to go inside and to think about how we think and to reflect on what we believe is important and not just simply be busy, but hopefully to chart a new path forwards. I don't want us returning to normal. because normal wasn't serving us. If we think about the statistics in North America, at least, it was 1 in 5 people with a mental health challenge, 85% of the population not getting enough physical activity to prevent a chronic disease, 25% of the population diagnosed sleeping disorder. And on and on and on. And we could go through loads of statistics, skyrocketing rates of burnout, depression, anxiety, those sorts of things. I want us to reimagine the future and to use this last year as a chance to reset and to deliberately chart a path forwards that enables us to be healthy and to spend more time on the things that we love, if that's possible in our lives. So that's what I'm hoping for. And I think that's the grand challenge. I think if we do that legitimately, we can then begin to lean into some of the grander challenges that the world is faced with. I believe that we're faced with a climate crisis. I think that that's something that we cannot ignore. And I know it's for some strange reason that is controversial. I just think it's a scientific fact. So whatever, moving on, let's deal with it. Just like we did with COVID, it was scientific fact. We're dealing with it, moving on. And so I think that hopefully this is giving us a chance to reset, reimagine the future, and begin to tackle some of the grand challenges that the whole planet's being faced with at the moment.
So I love that, right? And I think one of the things that we keep hearing with COVID is, I can't wait for things to get back to normal. So how do we, in our position, kind of, as educators, as hopefully, people who are inspiring the next generation, how do we get people to stop thinking in that context? How do we get people to recognize that it was broke and we have to fix it?
I think that step one is that, I think humans from an evolutionary perspective, we have been successful when we've expended the least amount of energy. And so we default back to what's easiest. We default back to our unconscious habits because, to go and hunt, it costs energy, or, that's from an evolutionary perspective. And so we want to spend as little energy as possible. So it's easy just to quote unquote go back to normal. It's what we were doing before. Change is difficult, yet change is the only constant. We're constantly transforming. We're constantly growing. We're constantly changing. And so I would suggest to people that now that we've had a chance to wipe the slate clean of our scheduled activities, many of which have been canceled, many people have been forced to work from home. Therefore, you're not commuting. Therefore, you have extra time. We've been given the opportunity to spend more time with loved ones if we are at home, and your home situation is a good one. Knock on wood, mine is at the moment. Judith still tolerates me, which is cool. My kids are not yet sick of me, and they're not teenagers, so they still love me. So I think that it's incumbent upon us to take advantage of the time that we have been given, the potential, that maybe we're not commuting. So we've got 2 hours a day or 45 minutes a day or 20 minutes a day, whatever it happens to be. How can we use that time? Imagine if you went for a walk for 20 minutes a day for the rest of the year, next year, 2021, how much different your fitness and health would look like, given that as little as 15 minutes a day of walking is enough to reduce your risk of 13 different types of cancer by 24 to 40%. So we can install these little tiny habits and positive practices into our life. And when we add them up, they exponentially amplify our health and well-being. So I just think it's such a huge opportunity to do things differently and not just simply revert back to normal, which is the default easy thing to do, but maybe to deliberately craft a future through journaling, through thinking, through introspection, through conversations with your loved ones and the people that are close to you, that actually makes your life better. So that's what I'm really hoping that we can do, and maybe take the holidays that are coming up to do some of that thinking, some of that journaling, and have some of those conversations, and take control of our lives so that it's actually awesome. And let's make 2021 a lot better and a lot different than 2020. I think that we can definitely do that.
Absolutely. I think we are prevented from running, or we can't just run away from a lot of our issues. I think there is a lot of introspection going on in a lot of people's lives. And I think many people probably dealt with those things by going someplace or doing something. And now we're limited, right? So it almost is we're forced to kind of sit with ourselves and really be introspective and see how we can, improve in that way. And I think that's so important.
Mm-hmm.
Hey guys, Janna Breslin here again. Most of you have heard me speak on the benefits of beets. Beets are well known as a powerful superfood and help the body create nitric oxide, the miracle molecule that supports a healthy cardiovascular system and sexual function. As an athlete, the nitric oxide boosting benefits help me power through workouts better than any artificial pre-workout I've ever taken. Now, this is why we created Complete Human Resbeat. You get all of the benefits of organic beets with additional anti-aging support from fermented resveratrol. Resveratrol is a longevity gene activator and is something I have turned to for years to help support anti-aging and optimal health. If you're not a fan of the taste of beets, we've got you covered with our all-natural and delicious dark cherry flavor. I take Resbeat twice a day, and I have to say, I feel incredible. Head on over to store.completehuman.com and enter the code podcast at checkout to get 20% off. Hey guys, you may not know it, but my morning coffee connects me to millions of women coffee farmers across the world. Women coffee farmers often face tremendous hardships, including horrible working conditions, little pay, and abuse. Complete Human has decided to do something about this problem by launching a line of coffee where the proceeds from those sales go to support women coffee farmers around the world. Not only is every bag of Cafe Caramea single batch organic coffee delicious, but the proceeds go directly to these women looking to break the long cycle of oppression. These funds help them enact real change in their communities and gives them a fair price for every pound of coffee their small micro farms produce. Most of us drink coffee every morning. Now that morning cup can be a source of real change in the world. Head on over to store.completehuman.com to purchase your bag of Cafe Caramea.
So, you talked about like the 20 minutes a day, going out for a walk, doing things like that. And now I'm assuming, and we haven't had the pleasure of reading The Ripple Effect, but in your book, you kind of talk a lot about that. So I'd love to dive into that concept as far, what does that really mean in your mind, this ripple effect, and how does that exponentially improve our health and wellness?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So a few years ago, I took some time and wrote a book called The Ripple Effect. And I'm a scientist. I'm a researcher. I work at a children's hospital in Toronto, Canada, and I do exercise medicine research to help figure out how we can use physical activity to help kids with cancer and cystic fibrosis and heart conditions. And that's been my research practice for almost 10 years now. Before that, I was doing research on high performance sports. And so in high performance sports and working with the Olympic team, we were interested in psychology and nutrition and strength and conditioning, all leading to better performance. So I spent some time thinking about human health at the hospital and human performance with the Olympic team and looked for commonalities from the extremes, right? Like, so if it works for a kid with cancer and it works for an Olympian, it's probably going to work for everyone in between. And out of that, really settled on 4 core factors that I thought would make a huge difference for the vast majority of people in terms of improving their health and well-being. And the first one of those key factors, I think, is sleep. Because when we sleep well, our brains repair and regenerate, our bodies repair and regenerate, growth hormone gets circulated, we heal all of our tissues, we regulate leptin and ghrelin, the hormones that control our appetite and satiety, so we can make better decisions around food. We learn better, we're more creative, and we're just happier in general. So sleep is the foundation. The next piece of that puzzle was nutrition. So when we eat amazing, healthy food that's fantastic for us, that elevates our health and well-being mentally and physically, then all of a sudden we're able to recover and regenerate better and have the energy to pursue our passions. And we know, of course, that exercise is massive for us. I'm an exercise physiologist, so I always default into exercise. Exercise reverses chronic diseases, extends lifespan, improves mental health, and radically improves mental performance as well on a number of different tasks. And then if you do those 3 things, sleep, eat, and move, I believe that sets us up to have a healthy brain. And that enables us to think clearly and be creative and do the things that we want to do in our life at the highest possible level. The cool thing is that they're all interrelated. When you sleep better, you can make better decisions around food. When you eat better, you have more energy, you can work out. When you work out, you have better mindset. When you have better mindset, you're more relaxed and you can get a better night's sleep. So these factors exponentially amplify each other. And that was the foundation of that book. And the most popular element of that book has turned out to be the 1% tips. So throughout the book, my editor asked me to just drop in these very, very, very simple 1% ideas. So little tiny things that you can drop into your life. And turns out that those have been the things that people have loved the most about that book. So I do believe in the aggregate of 1% gains. Micro wins consistently over time are a lot easier and more effective and permanent than massive overall changes in our lifestyle, which we all try to do, especially in January of every year. But usually fail with. So that was the whole principle behind that book. And now you don't have to buy it. You can just sort of think about that and move on. So
Oh, no, everybody
yeah,
go
that was the
buy
ripple
it.
effect.
Go buy the book. In fact, we're going to do a book report, or require a book report from our audience
There we
in a
go.
couple
Nice.
weeks. But I
Yeah,
love that
cool.
you said that, right? Like 1% is,
It's a commitment to daily work, but it's still the work instead of the let's take the pill to fix the problem, right? Well, if I'm not sleeping well, give me an Ambien, and then that'll solve all those problems. But and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about this. But as we know, with a lot of these, sleep pharmaceutical products, right? We're not really activating our lymphatic system. We're not really kind of getting into that restful sleep that allows us to do all the things that you talk about. So let's really talk about the fundamental nature of sleep and how important that is from a physiological perspective.
Yeah, sure. In fact, the research, I'm glad you brought that up, because the research shows that consistently taking sleep medications actually shortens lifespan. So it does, you do pass out, but you don't actually recover and regenerate and heal and regenerate all of your tissues. And so we look at sleep medications as a bridge towards installing all of the positive sleep habits that enable you then to not use the sleep meds. And of course, if you're on chemotherapy, then you cannot sleep, then your doctor's prescribing some sleep meds, of course, take the sleep meds. But in the meantime, for everyone else, let's really work on crafting that lifestyle that enables us to sleep well. And so when it comes to the physiology of sleep, there's some really cool things that happen. We have 5 different types of sleep: REM and stage 1, 2, 3, 4. REM is when you dream. Stage 1 and stage 2 are sort of light sleep, and stage 3 and 4 are deep sleep. In deep sleep, which happens in the first half of the night, that's when the brain washes itself out. Neurons inside the brain shrink by about 60%. Space opens up inside the brain. A clear fluid called cerebral spinal fluid washes through the brain, and the glial lymphatic system activates to wash out viruses, bacteria, broken down cells, waste products, amyloid plaques that are associated with Alzheimer's. And the brain literally cleans and washes itself out every single night while we sleep. Interestingly enough, it appears to work better if you sleep on your side. So not only do you snore less, and you actually wash your brain a little bit better too. In the second half of sleep, that's when we work on consolidating memories for the day. That's when you dream. That's when we encode information, and that's in light sleep and REM sleep. That is also when we set the stage for creativity and problem solving for the rest of the day, which is really why we need to give ourselves permission to get enough sleep, because the first half is really about the physiological recovery processes, and the second half is all about optimizing mental performance and the actual consolidation of information into the brain, which you can then use for the rest of your day and hopefully your life. So sleep's incredibly important. It's the foundation. 7 to 8 hours is the goal. 5 complete sleep cycles, 90 minutes each. And if we can do that, we set ourselves up for a really great opportunity to have a long, healthy life.
I'm glad you said that too, and I think you and I could geek out on this, because
Yes.
I've spoken on stages for years about sleep, and I laugh because here in the United States, 8 hours of sleep became the de facto. That's how long you sleep, and that was more based off the Industrial Revolution, saying 8 hours of work, 8 hours of family time, 8 hours of sleep. But at a 90-minute sleep cycle, you can't actually get 8 hours. It's like 6 hours, 7.5, 9 hours. So I definitely love the fact that you're talking about this in the context of, what does a sleep cycle look like and how do we optimize that? Now, I'd love to chat a little bit more, because this is the first I've heard of this, of sleeping on your side versus your back. And how does that actually work?
That's new for me too.
Yeah, no, I've picked that up just most recently. Ben Greenfield put me onto that one. We had this chat when we were on a podcast together, and it's just, we're beginning to discover more and more and more about how this glial lymphatic system works, and the fact that certain positions appear to enhance the function of the glial lymphatic system, with sleeping on your side appearing to make it a little bit easier for the glial lymphatic system to do what it needs to do. Now, all of that imagery is starting to happen now. It was first done by Jeff Iliff's team. So if anyone wants to look up his TED Talk, you can see some of the early images of the system as it was identified a few years ago. But now that's, I think, I'm trying to remember the name of the research paper that was published most recently, where you can actually literally visualize the system working as the neurons shrink and these vessels open up inside the brain and fluids move through the brain. And literally you can see it like flowing throughout all of the different tissues. It's absolutely incredible, the imagery that's being done, the imaging that's being done right now, and our ability to understand the system better. We're in so early stages of understanding sleep. We still don't even really understand, what dreaming does, but we're definitely learning a lot. And I think that people now value it because people are so tired. when I do keynotes like you do and speak from the stage, I'll often ask people like, how many of you are tired right now? And inevitably 80% of the audience puts up their hands. So even though only 20%, 25% of, diagnosed sleeping problems, I think the vast majority of us struggle most of the time, given just how busy our lives are, and that we haven't necessarily to date valued sleep as a tool to, really enhance our health and our well-being and our performance. And by sleeping more, we can accomplish more. I think that we've traditionally thought of it as in terms of sleeping less to accomplish more, when in fact, quite the opposite is true. End point being is that we're learning so much. So stay tuned, and people want to just search that information. They can just look up gliolymphatic system and you'll find it. There's all sorts of info being published there relatively often these days. Matt Walker from Stanford University is a good researcher to look up on that.
Yeah, and I've talked a lot about that, quite a bit, but the whole sleeping on the side is kind of interesting. And you're thinking if you're pulling cerebral spinal fluid up to really kind of go through this spin cycle of your brain and clear all this stuff out, I'm wondering if we should start sleeping upside down like bats.
Just like gravity help.
Yeah, just
cool.
yeah. I don't. Just a thought.
Wow.
Those ergonomic beds where you can sleep upright. No, we got to go the other direction.
That's amazing. Well, obviously sleep is tremendously important, and there's so much that happens there that you wouldn't necessarily think that it does. So that's incredible. And I love for you to touch on why we should defend the first hour, or I guess the last hour of the day before we go to bed.
Yeah, I love that idea. So, one of the challenges that we're faced with is that we just don't sleep very well. People struggle with sleep. They have a hard time falling asleep. They have a really hard time staying asleep. I think the number one question that I get from people when I'm doing speaking engagements is, okay, I wake up at 3:00 in the morning and I can't get back to sleep again. What do I do? And so when we defend our last hour, we're able to control the quality of our sleep. And the cool thing is now, there's so many wearable technologies available to us so people can actually start tracking their own sleep. I don't think they're sleep laboratory quality, but in terms of just you looking at yourself over time, I think they're fantastic. I think the Oura ring is an incredible piece of technology. I think Fitbit does a decent job of it. Apple Watch is starting to develop some better abilities to track your sleep. There's an app that we developed in our lab called Vivio, VIIVIO, for Apple Watch that enables you to track your sleep and get deep sleep, REM, and light sleep data and find out how you're doing. And so once we begin to develop this understanding of ourselves, we can implement tactics that enable us to sleep better and actually track whether or not that's having an effect. So when we defend our last hour, that's what I truly believe can determine and really have an impact on the quality of your sleep. The number one thing to do in that last hour, I believe, is simply not look at your technology. We've got to have a break from our technology. Put away the phone, put away the tablet, get the TV out of the bedroom, read a book, take a bath, do some meditation, talk to your loved one. There's so many things we can do, yoga, meditation, all sorts of stuff to downshift leading into sleep rather than, work, scroll through social, check the internet, quick check of email, put away your device and expect to suddenly go from a bright, stimulating device sizzling your brain straight into sleep to a calm, and basically the whole idea is basically to create a digital sunset as you approach sleep time that enables your brain to relax and slow down its electrical activity so that you can fall asleep quickly and deeply and ideally stay asleep as well. So yeah, defend your last hour is an incredible tactic for people to begin to implement if they want to try to sleep a little bit better.
And the physiology of that is really decreasing cortisol and increasing melatonin production as you go into that sleep, going into sleep. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, you want to do everything you can to optimize the brain releasing its own melatonin in order for you to be able to fall asleep. So that basically means that what we're trying not to do is put any light into our eyes, because what happens is the light goes through your eyeball, hits the back of your eyeball, activates receptors which shoot electricity back through your optic nerve into a structure deep in your brain called the pineal gland. The pineal gland releases a hormone called melatonin. So if you shine light into your eyes, you are electrically stimulating the pineal gland, which shuts off the release of melatonin, making it really difficult for you to fall asleep quickly and deeply. That's why investing in blackout blinds are so important. That's why turning on the blue light filters on your devices is so important, starting at sunsets, that you just go to settings, displays, and night shift if you're on iOS, and just activate that at sunset, make it automated so it happens on all your devices. And that way you're eliminating blue light, you're darkening your house, you're not putting light into your eyes, and you're defending the light in your home through blackout blinds, so that your natural rhythms so you're naturally responsive to the light dark cycles of the sun. We're so dissociated from the light dark cycles of the sun. Almost every organism on the planet has something called a suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is a structure deep inside the brain, which is sensitive to light. And that controls our circadian rhythms. And so now that we're indoors, but we've got electricity all around us, the suprachiasmatic nucleus is being stimulated all the time. So it's dissociated from the light dark cycles of the sun, which makes it difficult for us to fall asleep. So try to replicate the sun going down, create a digital sunset in your home. We installed dimmer switches everywhere a little while ago. So at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, I've got young kids. We walk around, we dim all of the lights in the house. My kids get a little bit more drowsy and makes it easier to get them up into bed. It's totally manipulating their physiology. Maybe not the most ethical thing in the world, but we do it anyway. And so just basically create the digital sunset in your home, give your pineal gland a break, allow it to release melatonin, and you'll sleep a lot better.
We're going to get so many emails from parents after that saying, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
You know what I love though? So many of these things are free or so inexpensive to implement into your lifestyle to improve your health and your sleep. I think a lot of people initially go to, hey, what pharmaceutical drug can I take to help with my sleep? What pills, what supplements can I take that will help my sleep? But not a lot of people understand that they can also try these things first, and maybe this is the missing link for them to get that good sleep. So I think this is so important to start with the basics and then maybe get some outside help if you need it.
Yeah, and that's powerful coming from you, given your pharmaceutical background, right? Like, and I know your history is you've sort of moved from selling pharmaceuticals to promoting a healthier lifestyle, which is really interesting that you've had that sort of revelation. And I'm not anti-pharma. I think that, I work in cancer. I want the chemotherapy drugs to be available for our kids. I want the vaccines to be available for our kids. But at the same time, I do think the economics of it are such that there is a drive to sell drugs to solve problems. There's a drive to, whenever there's a economic engine behind something, it's easy to promote. There's a reason for people to educate around that. The problem is that most of the things we're talking about are free,
right?
As you said. And so there is no real engine or driver for people to be hyper motivated to share the fact that by turning off all of your devices, you're going to sleep really well. And then you don't need the sleep beds. Like that's not going to motivate a lot of people to get that information out there. We have to do that ourselves. We have to do that through the communities that we're building. We have to share this information on podcasts like this one to get the information out to millions of people so that people can take control of their lives, take control of their health, liberate themselves from unnecessary medications. And sometimes medications are necessary, but a lot of the time they're not. And help people learn to live a healthy life that's good for themselves and for the planet as well. So no, I love the direction that you're taking, the fact that you picked that up. It's cool to see that your own history leading you down a road of realization around a lot of this. And it's cool that you guys are sharing that. So that's neat.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Well, and I think it's funny, you talked about the economic engine, but I think what we see oftentimes with pharmaceuticals is they'll almost artificially create the engine. And I think of restless leg syndrome as one that popped up like 10, 15 years ago. And, watching TV and seeing commercials for restless leg syndrome, you're like, what the hell is that? and now there's a pharmaceutical product. Like, but if we get back to basics with all the things that you're talking about, the sleep, eat, move, think concept, how many of those artificial problems just kind of go away on their own?
Like, think about that. Restless leg syndrome. So you're sitting on the couch and you have an urge to move your legs. So we're going to give you a drug so that you don't have to move. And just think about that as a concept for 2 seconds. You have an urge to move your legs, which means you want to walk. That's what humans have been doing for 300,000 years. Yep. And when you go for a walk, you reduce your risk of 13 different types of cancer by 24 to 40%. If you walk for an hour a day, you reduce your risk of colds, flus, and other viral infections by 75%. If you walk 3 times a week for 45 minutes, you reduce your risk for depression and anxiety by up to 40%. Just think about the power of movement and the fact that when you feel like moving, some of these companies have created products to enable you to stay still. It's absolutely crazy. I
It's
spoke
backwards.
at it's completely backwards. You know, I spoke at a large pharmaceutical conference a few years ago, and this is actually for one of my clients. They ended up hiring me, so the truth actually helped. But it was for all of their 1,200 pharmacists that they had. And I said, so consider your model. At the back of the store, you sell medications to help people with diabetes. And then as you check out at the front of the store with that medication, you sell them sugary candy bars, which cause the diabetes. I was like, you guys have the best business model I've ever seen. Like, you're selling them the products that cause disease and treat it at the front of the store, and then the products that cure the disease, or treat the disease, I should say, at the back of the store. Like, just think about that. And there's, of course, crickets in the entire room. And I've been working with them for 2 years ever since to try to come up with new ways of thinking as they transition to a new model, which, to their credit, they're actually doing. Where, you know, the pharmacist is really helping people to learn rather than just prescribing medications, which is ultimately the direction I think that industry could go, is really helping people understand and you put yet another educated healthcare provider into the community that doesn't necessarily just provide the drugs, which sometimes you need, but also provides holistic health and well-being advice as well. So I think that we definitely need to go down a different road with all of that. And I think that restless leg syndrome story is quite funny. So anyway, went off on a tangent there, but I'm back with you now.
It actually reminds me of a story that you told about your own health, where you were admitted to your own hospital for a heart condition or a heart issue, right? And the food that I remember you explained the food that you were given. You're like, wait a minute, this is not correct here. So I'd love for you to touch on that story.
Yeah, sure. So summer of 2012, moving houses. My wife was finishing grad school. I was about a year into a new job at the University of Toronto. I was operating a lab at Sick Kids Hospital. I was publishing my first book, Super Bodies, getting ready to go commentate the Olympics for Canada in London, for Canadian television in London. And so, I mean, life was just crazy, right? It was all happening. So wasn't eating particularly well, just, you know, because we were in and out of our house, super stressed with moving, grad school, Olympics, book, job, craziness. And I had a 2-year-old, my daughter Ingrid was 2 at the time. And she went, so I hadn't slept in 2 years. So she went to daycare. She got a cold. I was so run down that I got the cold, and she recovered quite easily. But I was so run down that the virus went into my heart, and I ended up with viral myocarditis, which is not uncommon, I've learned. So I landed in the hospital at Toronto General, where I was a scientist at the time. So checking yourself into your own hospital, super embarrassing and not a great career move, just for the record. And I was in there in the cardiac ward and hooked up to all the gear that, you know, I normally am collecting data from for research studies. So I'm seeing all of this data for myself. And so that wasn't very cool. And the first night that I was in the hospital, all night long, the alarms were going off and the lights are on and people are walking in and out of the rooms. It's noisy. So nobody's sleeping, like no one, not the staff, not the patients, no one's sleeping. Wake up in the morning and they bring us, I'll just put it in air quotes for the people listening, not watching, bring us breakfast in air quotes. And I look at it and I'm like, oh my God, this is the exact same food that causes heart disease. And I'm in the cardiac ward
Right.
and they just brought me the same food, like toast, jam, orange juice, something that could generally be termed as some kind of sausage. I don't know. Anyways, and some like this fruit cup. So basically like pure cardiovascular destruction on a plate right in front of me.
In the cardio ward at the hospital.
In the cardiac ward at the hospital at scale to all of the patients. So that was like light bulb number 2. And I sort of looked around and I realized everyone was on edge, like completely stressed out. Staff, family, patients. Of course, it's the cardiac ward. People are dying. Everyone's stressed. That was the third piece. And then I looked around and nobody was moving. Everyone was crashed out at the nursing station. The patients are in beds. Families are sitting in chairs around the beds. It's like the only thing that's going to cure anyone of heart disease is exercise, and no one's moving. So that was the light bulb that day, that 24 hours lying in the cardiac ward, where I was like, sleep's a problem, nutrition's a problem, stress is a problem, and exercise is a problem. And that led me down the road of discovering the Eat, Sleep, Move, Think 4 pillars and those 4 grand epidemics that the world is faced with that led to the Ripple Effect book and all sorts of other stuff. So while in the cardiac ward, I was like, I got to get out of here and never come back. So I called my buddy, Mike, and it's like, Mike, we're doing Ironman. And he's like, no, I'm not doing Ironman. I'm like, look, I'm in the cardiac ward. I need to train. I'm registering for Ironman right now, and I need a training partner. He's like, fair enough. You're paying the entry fee. And I was like, fine, whatever. So anyway, 12 months later, we both finished our first Ironman, but it literally was the beginning of me really integrating all of these ideas into my life. I've been an athlete my whole life, I've been a researcher my whole life. So sometimes it was great, and other times it went off the rails like I just described. But as we get older, our degrees of freedom probably decrease. We can't get away with the stuff we could get away with earlier. So now it's really, for the last 8 years, been a very big focus for Judith and me and Ingrid and Adam, my 2 kids. And hopefully now also we can begin to share those ideas with the rest of the world to help other people make these types of adjustments in their life without having to go through the health crisis that makes them think deeply about what's going on.
Well, and isn't that very similar to kind of the way that we think as human beings? It's when the brakes are squealing, right? Like, nobody takes their car in before there's a problem. And oftentimes, with the human body, it can be too little too late. And I know that you've talked a lot about telomeres or telomeres, and kind of that construct is, those are one of those unsilent indicators of how bad we've treated our body. And at a certain point, it's like, well, the wheels have fallen off the bus. Now it's just managing a disease until you die. So, let's talk a little bit about telomeres, and then how you guys are really inspiring people to make some of these profound changes prior to, the brakes squealing.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And the whole idea behind exercise medicine and the work we do at Sick Kids is that we exercise kids in the MRI and image their brains and their lungs and their hearts and their muscles as they're exercising, because it's when you're moving, it's when you're pushing the limits that you discover the problems that aren't observable when you're at rest. And unfortunately, unless you're doing that type of testing, we don't discover those problems until your body's been pushed to the limits. And sometimes that means that you've landed in the hospital with a heart problem, or you've discovered that you have cancer, or you've done the blood work with your doc because you're not feeling very good and you've discovered that you have type 2 diabetes, or you're in a deep, dark place mentally and you speak to someone and we discover that you're struggling with depression or anxiety. And so I would really love for all of us to not wait until that moment when, as you say, the brakes are squealing, and just do little tiny things that help you on a daily basis. Now, the funny thing is that if we try to tell people that you need to do this just to be healthier and to prevent chronic disease, the vast majority of people are gonna be like, yeah, okay, whatever. I'm fine. So, a story on this, I was doing a presentation for probably 200 lawyers in downtown Toronto. And believe me, looking around the room, they needed to learn about health and well-being. This is quite a while ago. So I'm talking about how to eat for better health and to prevent chronic illness. And they're all on their phones. They're completely ignoring me. It was PD. They had to be there to earn their PD hours so they're all ignoring me. So I was like, okay, well, this isn't working. So I was like, here's a protocol that you can use to have great concentration and focus for 3 to 4 hours at a time. Here are the foods you need to eat to enable you to concentrate all afternoon with no mental breakdowns whatsoever. Everyone puts away their phones. They break out the pens. They're all taking notes. It was the exact same foods. I'm like, eat a lot of protein, make sure it's healthy, make sure it's organic, have some healthy brain fats, minimal carbohydrates, make sure that they're complex and slow digesting, lots of water, some green tea. And they're like, oh, this is great. Awesome protocol. Thanks, Greg. I'm like, no problem. By the way, this also prevents cancer, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and depression. So the key thing around all of this is, if we want to be better, if we want to get healthier, if we want to help people incorporate these ideas into their lives, I believe one of the key things we need to do is tie all of these practices, exercise, healthy nutrition, proper sleep, recovery and regeneration, massage therapy, like all of these different tactics, if we can tie them to what people care about the most in their lives, playing music, doing drama, building a business, having a healthy family, taking care of your kids, whatever it happens to be that matters to you the most, if we can tie all of those healthy practices to you doing that better, that's what actually I have found enables people to consistently incorporate them into their lives. So if you're thinking about this, like, I'd like to be healthier, think about what you care about the most. Like, what is your passion? What is your interest? What sparks you? Where do you spend your attention and energy? and then use food to help you do that better. Use exercise to enhance your ability to do that better. And it might be that you love exercise and you're into marathon running. Fantastic. That's a bonus. But if you're into robotics, it works just the same. So we need to, I think that's an approach that might really, really help people is let's tie being healthy to what you care about the most. And if we can do that, then I think it becomes a lot easier for us to find ways to incorporate this into our lives, because potential unrealized is, I think, one of the greatest pains that we're faced with as humans. So if we can tie healthy habits to you realizing your potential, then I think it becomes a lot easier for people to justify putting effort and attention into actually incorporating that stuff into new habits.
Greg, you and I might have been separated at birth.
I know.
Yeah. I've looked at some of your stuff. I was like, this is gonna be a great conversation. Like, we say the same things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I want to expand on what you just said, because the ultimate failure of the health and wellness industry is exactly what you just said, is we expect people to meet us where we're at instead of the other way around. It's, social media saying, well, if you want to look like I do, or if you want this six pack or this booty, then follow my program, instead of saying, like, what is important to you and how do we create protocols that make sense for the musician, the artist, the soccer mom who's just trying to figure out how she can get through another day without, drowning herself in the bathtub. And that's it. It's like, we think that the health and wellness industry needs to be aspirational based off of physical attributes, but it's quite the opposite. And in fact, I think that turns a lot of people off. Whereas if we find people's passion and inspire that passion through, sleeping, eating, moving, thinking, the 4 principles that we talk about in biooptimization, the success potential goes exponentially through the roof.
Yeah, it just makes the world better, right? Because I mean, just imagine having those conversations. Like, what do you care about them? So imagine someone comes and speaks to you like, I want to get healthier. Great. What do you care about? Like, what? Like, you start the conversation by asking them about them.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, instead of going like, all right, well, here's my program. You can buy it for $200 online and, off you go. And my Instagram feed is full of whatever, and hope that inspires you. And it's fine. It's totally okay. And I don't want, like, if someone uses that and it makes them better, then that's phenomenal. It's great. But I think that there's a potential for us to be more empathetic, to leverage the fact that love, compassion, gratitude, and community can make such a huge difference. I mean, I think that that's why events like Spartan Race are so powerful, because we bring a group of people together. And it could be Spartan Race, it could be CrossFit, it could be Soul Cycle, and there's issues with all of those different groups. But the point being is that people come together to do something that they care about, and getting healthier, getting fitter is part of that equation. And that could be, like, I actually it was kind of cool. I did a session for a robotics team recently, right? And like, these are grade 9 kids, fully into science, definitely not into physical activity or sports is their number one thing. But I was like, hey guys, you're going to this 3-day robotics competition. Here's what you need to eat in order to be clear, sharp, and focused. You can crush it on Sunday afternoon. They're all in. Like, when you wake up in the morning, you guys go for a walk together as a team to wake your brains up. They're all in. End of the day, to help you get a good night's sleep so you can crush it the next morning. Group meditation, 20 minutes using Headspace. They're all in, right? So when we think about that, that's our chance. That's our opportunity to help people live beautiful, incredible, fantastic lives around what they care about the most. And oh, by the way, they're also healthy. Fantastic. We've extended life by 10 years. I think there's so much potential for that to be a new approach. That's part of reimagining the future, right? Like, how do we reimagine the health and fitness industry that's been completely disrupted by this COVID-19 era, where most gyms have been forced to close, and people are now discovering that walking in the park makes them feel better than going to the gym and running on the treadmill for an hour, right? So there's all sorts of things that we can do here to change the conversation and move people forwards.
Well, and I love that you said that too, right? And let's look at the economics of this. People pay in Los Angeles $200, $300 a month to go to Equinox so that they can go inside and walk or run on a treadmill, where you could go to the park and do that for free. Like, and believe me, like, I know gyms are suffering right now, and we're definitely empathetic to that. But there's an economic model at play here where we feel compelled to spend money, as that's the justification for doing what we should be doing, where buy a pair of tennis shoes and go outside. Like, the benefits are so much greater. Now, maybe not in LA where the pollution sucks,
I
but
was gonna say.
Yeah. Well, just think about that. Like, I think a lot of just think about the psychology of it. And again, not to put, I think gyms have a place. I think that, you know, I live in Canada, having a gym in the winter is like just a savior for so many of us. Like, everything has its place. But what I would love for people to contemplate is, for you, what is the positive, encouraging, joyful drive for you to be healthier? And this is a lot of thinking that needs to go into this. If you're buying a fitness membership for $100, $200, $300 a month, thinking that by spending that money, that will force you to make the decision to go to the gym, that's like a negative reinforcer to, get you to do that healthy habit. If you're like, I absolutely love my 5 friends that I meet up with at spin class, and we go for a tea or coffee afterwards and we talk for an hour, and that's our social time. Fantastic. That's great. It's a positive driver. So let's look for the positive, joyful drivers. I love taking my kids outside into the woods, where I am right now for the winter. I've moved my family for the winter so we could be outdoors in nature, in the mountains, away from Toronto, where the city of 3 million, where I normally live. We're out in nature because I love being outside with my kids. And I know that every gym in the city is going to be closed for the next 3 to 4 months. So we needed to do things differently. And so I love being outdoors with my kids. I love watching their eyes come alive. I love them exploring and looking at plants and climbing trees and jumping off rocks. Like, they're hyper good athletes because they spend time outside. I love that so much. And so that's our drive. Like, that's what we're doing. That's what we spend more time. It's so easy for us to do that. It's kind of hard for me to go and do a yoga session in the living room in front of the TV, although I know it's amazingly good for me. I'd rather go for a walk outside with my family. So we're just going to do a lot of that this winter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to make us all better. If we can find these powerful, joyful drives, if we can find things that make us happy, if we can find things that we love to do, it's so easy to get them done. If it's being driven by negative reinforcement, then it's just simply not going to work long term. So think about that, journal about it, contemplate it, find the people, find your community, find your supporters, find your accountability partners, find your Navy SEAL team, and get out there and do things that are good for you, because it's what you love to do and it helps you do what you love to do even better.
That's very well said.
Absolutely. And
I should write that down. That's a good idea.
Yes.
That would be a good book.
That'd be a good podcast topic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it. So would you say that, though, like, associating these things with such a positive and joyful thing, is that the key to rewiring our brains?
Interesting. Neuroplasticity, the rewiring of our brains, is something that's exploded in research in the last 4 to 5 years. And essentially what we've discovered, we used to think that the brain was static. After 20, 21, 22 years old, it was thought that that's as many brain cells as that you had. And then you basically just lost brain cells gradually for the rest of your life. We've now discovered that the brain is highly plastic. It's modifiable. It grows. It changes constantly throughout our entire lives. And it grows and changes constantly depending upon all of the collective stimuli that go into the brain: what you see, what you listen to, what you eat, how you move, your environment. Everything constantly changes the brain at all times, depending upon what you're doing. So if you binge watch Netflix, which, by the way, I have done, if you binge watch
Guilty.
Netflix, right? So that will rewire your brain, probably not for the better. If you have ruminating thinking patterns where you're replaying events from your past that bother you, you will rewire your brain accordingly, making you more predisposed to anxiety, for example. If you read the biographies of the greatest people in history, that will rewire your brain. If you work out every day, that will rewire your brain. If you eat healthy brain foods like berries and nuts and healthy fats, that will rewire your brain. So the key really is that the sum total of everything that we do in our lives influences the neuroplasticity of our brains and rewires our brains positively or negatively over time. And of course, you're going to need to relax and have some fun and scroll through social or watch the movie or, have some ice cream from time to time. But what we're looking for is the sum total of positives to exceed the negatives and the drawbacks. And that way we're rewiring our brain for the better more and more and more over the long term. So little things like switching from, I heard about Michael Phelps. So he's a reasonably good athlete, swimmer for the States, won more Olympic medals than anybody else. But in 2014 was really struggling with mental health. He was not in a very good place. And part of his recovery from that was reevaluating the media sources that he was consuming. And prior to that point, he was reading like ESPN magazines. After that point, he pivoted to reading the biographies of the greats. And he said that was a key factor in helping him to rewire his thinking to get away from worrying about medals and money and fame and get back into the process of doing what he loved, which is training. If you look at him in 2016 in Rio, the pictures, he's happy, right? He's hugging people, he's high-fiving, he's thoroughly enjoying himself at that Olympics. Whereas if you look 4 years previously at London, fortunately, and I was lucky enough to be in London and to see some of this, but he wasn't happy. He was in business mode. He was getting the job done. He was still incredible, but he was working. Whereas in Rio, he was happy, right? So this whole concept of altering your life, leveraging epigenetics to craft this gorgeous life that enables us to rewire our brains and rewire our physiologies so we can function at the highest level most of the time. I think that's a huge opportunity for us that might come out of this very crazy time that we're in.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we have to recognize too is that part of, I think about Grumpy Old Men. Do you remember that movie?
Yes, yeah, I do.
It kind of reminds me of my grandfather, but if you really think about people who age and don't age well, they're grumpy. And the reason that they're grumpy is what I found is that any deviation from a standard day just throws them completely out of whack. And our brains are these different engines, right? Like they just try to optimize energy as much as possible by doing the same thing, these repetitive tasks. And whether that's, sitting on the couch, binge watching Netflix. And so one of the things that we always talk about in kind of, neurobiogenesis, neuroplasticity is do things that you haven't done, like keep shaking it up because your brain wants to learn and grow and evolve. And the more that we fall into these bad patterns, especially unhealthy ones, the binge watching Netflix, not that it's horrible, if you do it every day, it's bad, but it's just keep, like write down the top 10 things that you want to do in your life and go out and do them because they inspire you to get off the couch and have these experiences. Again, I just love that you say that, right? Because this whole beautiful experience, the tapestry of the human existence kind of comes at the tail end of us doing things outside of our comfort zone.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you brought up learn something new. That is so powerful. Like think about 2021, find something you've never done before, maybe scares you just a little bit, and let's learn to do that. Last year I went with a friend of mine and we did this thing called ice climbing. So I know people probably seen like rock climbing. This is, you take axes and you go out and you climb a frozen waterfall. And so you basically slam the axes into the ice and you have boots with little metal things on them and you stick your boots into the ice and you go vertical straight up a waterfall. And it was the most terrifying thing I have done in a very, very long time. And my brain was sizzling for weeks afterwards. And all I could think about was like, I got to go back and try that again. So when we learned the new things, and it could be like picking up a guitar, taking an art class, dance lessons, learning how to swim, learning how to have a conversation with a difficult conversation with a loved one. Like it does not matter what it is. It doesn't need to be ice climbing. When we learn something new, it brings so many of our capabilities on board and leads us to so many other opportunities around thinking differently about things in other areas of our life. So love that idea of learning something new every year.
Yeah, and what was that? Do you remember the Everybody Wears Sunscreen song that came out? It was a Baz Luhrmann commencement speech in Australia, and they turned it into that song. And one thing that I loved about it was do one thing every day that scares you. Like, because that shakes the brain up too. But that, and ice climbing is definitely one of those things that I think are going to scare the bejesus out of most people.
Yeah, it was insane. It was absolutely nuts. Yeah, we'll just try that. You know what? The really interesting thing about that moment, that one of the biggest things I'll take away from is we went up 3 of them. So there's 3 waterfalls as we went up this mountain. And the third one's the hardest. And so I didn't make it up the third one. But coming back down, at one point you have to rappel back down, which means you're tied into ropes, and then you sort of let yourself down using the ropes. So you go back down the way that you came up. And so there's one point where we had to stand at the top of this frozen waterfall. You're roped in, but you have to lean backwards and then go back over this cliff down. And the psychology of it is so crazy because I looked at the tree that I was like attached to and the little tiny wires that I was attached to this tree on. I'm like, my life is literally hanging by a thread and I'm going to trust this guide not to kill me.
Right.
And so I went back, and when I went back, as I moved down the first 5 feet, I was very much vertical out of fear, right? So you can imagine that my feet were below my knees, below my hips, and below my body. And I was sort of parallel to the ice as I was going down. So as a result, all of the pressure was on the boots, and I kept on slipping and slamming myself into the ice, which of course is not safe and painful. And then I was like, okay, you just got to relax into this. And so when you relax, then all of a sudden your feet are straight into the ice ahead of you. And it's almost like you're sitting with straight legs. And when you're in that position, there's enough force to drive your feet into the ice. You're leaning way back. You've got great control of the ropes, and you're totally locked in and safe. It's so counterintuitive, right? But when I reminded myself to relax and lean back, that's what enabled me to accomplish the task of getting down this ice massive piece of ice that was 60 feet tall. But that has translated into so many other aspects of my life, right? Like relaxing when I'm spending time with my children and they're doing things that annoy me as children do, grabbing things from each other, etc. Or in the middle, getting ready for a presentation, calming down and relaxing into the content so that I can share ideas. The learnings that we get from trying new things and failing and being afraid and being scared are so powerful. And that's what really enables us to go to different levels in so many different aspects of your life that you'd never expect for there to be connections with, but we always end up there. So anyway.
And we talk
Crazy.
about that a lot as far as failing fast.
Well, we've got such an ass backwards view of failure. Like failure should be celebrated, not criticized. Like in politics is like the worst area that we see this, right? Like all the political commercials. Well, this person failed at this and this person failed at this. I want a leader who's failed. I want a leader who's failed and recognize the mistakes and the opportunity that comes from fail. But yet we've come to attack people's character, and because of those failures, is like that's a bad thing. Nobody's perfect, and the illusion that there is such a thing as perfection is driving so many of these psychological problems that people deal with time and time again. It's like that's a whole other podcast. Don't get me started.
Yeah, we can go.
I'm gonna go for a walk.
I mean, I think that the fact we don't allow kids to fail in school anymore is one of the primary drivers behind the anxiety epidemic in children right now. I think that failing fast, failing often is fantastic. Like how many iterations of the light bulb did Edison do before he finally came up with one that worked, right? Like 1,000 failures. So imagine if he had quit at 900, we wouldn't have had light bulbs. So yeah, I think failure is so important. It's great. Like it's how you learn. It's testing yourself. It's when I was with the Olympic team, we would never really, the Olympic team and sort of that level of athletes, like you don't seek out competitions where it's easy for you to win. You seek out competitions where you're faced with people who are better than you are. Like you don't want to go in and win easily, because if you go in and win easily, you don't learn anything. You go in and you test yourself against the best people that are better than you. You're going to find out what's working, what's not working. And then you know exactly what your strengths are and where your weaknesses are and where you need to work to get better. You don't discover that unless you fail. I think people are so afraid of failure right now, especially in this era of social media where, you're criticized constantly, no matter what you do. Just imagine the terror of growing up right now on Instagram and posting something and have people just tearing you to shreds. Like I have a hard time with it. I'm almost 50, right? I can imagine it would be super difficult at 14. So I could not agree with you guys more. It's a super important topic, and we should definitely do another podcast just on that. That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. We've been talking about like social media addiction and all that too. And it's an epidemic within the pandemic.
Oh, I think the pandemic has been made exponentially worse because of social media. It's when did masks or when did science become, open for, and we need to have a healthy skepticism of science and debate the science within the scientific realm. But, when someone who didn't pass high school biology is telling me what I should be doing to optimize my immune system in the middle of a global pandemic. I'm like, that's the problem that we have, right? I think democracy, or the idea of freedom, is advanced citizenship, where we've given people a voice who don't necessarily deserve one, at a table where, it's like, if you want to talk about how to get the best butt, go for it. If that's your wheelhouse, give me all the
Yeah.
information in the world. But, like politics, religion, all these things that are controversial topics, they need a little bit more of you need to have some credentials to show up at that table.
It's true.
I need more
A colleague
coffee.
of mine, Kunal Gupta, in New York, runs an interesting company called Polar Mobile, and he wrote a blog post recently about his vision for the next iteration of the web, which is what he calls the trusted web. And right now, we've got is a situation where everyone has a voice, which is fine. But what he's predicting is that the next iteration will be that we will actually have a trusted, sort of maybe even back to where we were before the internet, but a trusted web where you will have trusted advisors who are specialists in the information will be vetted, and there'll be a bit more of a resource that we can use with a little bit more faith that the information that we're getting is actually scientifically credible. And you're absolutely right that we've been sort of faced with a death of the truth over the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
And I post-truth society almost. And we definitely need to do a better job of that in the future. I also, as a scientist, as a researcher, as an academic, to some extent, I take responsibility for that. I think that in academia, in the universities, in the research institutions, as scientists, we have not done a good job of communicating. And because of that, there has been the proliferation of, anyone is an epidemiologist right now. If you have a Twitter account, you're an epidemiologist. It's crazy. And I think that to some extent that's because the epidemiologists who are in institutions have been focused on publishing papers and getting grants. I mean, that's how we run our careers, and not necessarily engaging with the public. And I think that as scientists, as researchers, we have an obligation, given that in many cases we are funded by the public, to better engage and to communicate better and to disseminate the research in a way that's understandable for people, so that people trust the science and we can move forwards together, not in a viciously divided world that we're in right now, where science becomes politicized, which is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's the key. I think that one of the major things we need to do as scientists in the scientific community and people with credentials, legit credentials, we need to communicate a lot better. We need to be a lot more empathetic. We need to listen to each other a lot more, and we just need to help each other. And I think that that's ultimately where we can land in a much, much better place in the future.
Well, and so much of this, Greg, I think is a societal thing, right? I mean, we're talking about a society that's, that's put Kim Kardashian into a place where she has 30 million followers on Instagram, but yet, legitimate scientists doing real work that has the potential to impact the trajectory of the human species are struggling to write grants and get funding. So I mean, like there's a whole ass backwards component to this that we need to address, and that's a whole series of podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Greg, I think we're out of time, but
on that one.
Yeah.
Cool.
We're definitely out of time on this one, but this has teed up so much that I think we want to talk about. And most importantly, I think if we're going to go to this trusted web, I don't know about you, but I'd love to have you on our advisory board. I think,
cool.
Yeah, I'd be honored and privileged to work with you guys and help you out in any way that we can, share the right information to your community, support people like crazy to get healthier and to reach their potential. So yeah, I'd love to do this again. Be great.
Let's do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've just had the pleasure of spending the last hour with Dr. Greg Wells. We're going to put all of his information in the show notes, including his books, his show, all of the work that he's done. This guy's been all over the place. And in fact, I don't know if we actually owe you a royalty fee, because we did see you on Jim Quick using the word complete human, possibly before we did.
It's pretty neat.
Really?
A lot of synergies.
Oh, wait, that's super awesome. Right on. That's super cool. I'm glad. That's great.
It was awesome.
I hope I didn't break any trademarks on that one. But, yeah.
You'll be hearing from our attorney later.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Greg, thank you so much for being a part of the Complete Human Experience.
Thank you.
Pleasure, guys. Thanks so much for having me on the show. It was great.